So to all, today the topic will be more focused around identity and access management in AWS. And we'll also go over basic security controls or monitoring that we can have to make sure the IAM services and its users or the roles are not misused or over permissively granted. So this is the particular content today we are planning to cover in identity and access management. So we'll start with understanding what IAM is specific to the AWS, and then we'll start going one step deeper and understand what are the key components that are present in IAM. So we'll walk through what a particular policy would look like and how do we write a particular policy in IAM, and whatever the written policy, how do we apply it to a particular user, a group, or a role. And there are some advanced concepts as well, like secure token service, as well as inline policy, which will help us to give specific granular level access. And as well as if you have any automations or any scripts that needs to access AWS services or any resources, we can leverage IAM role and STS. Right. And then the last final part of this particular presentation will focus on its security around IAM. So we'll go over what are the best practices when it comes to IAM, passwords, how do we handle the keys, access keys, and all these things. And on top of it, we do have one of the service that is Access Analyzer, IAM Access Analyzer. So we'll also go through and see how we can leverage this particular tool that is a native solution from AWS, and we'll have a better monitoring around access role permissions granted. Right. Right. So the first step is, let us understand what IAM or Identity Access Management. So basically this IAM is a concept or a service, right? Like any service in AWS. So in AWS, we have many category of services, like a storage service, like an S3 bucket, or a compute service, like a EC2 instances, or a container, or a EKS Kubernetes clusters, as well as we have database services as well, like an RDS or a MongoDB or Aurora DB. So a lot of service categories are present in AWS, and one such category is something known as IAM. So this IAM is completely focused on the authorization level part, right? So IAM concept comes in once the user logs into particular AWS account or has access to an account, right? So here AWS IAM completely focuses on what resources a particular user or a group or a role can access, right? So in IAM, we write policies, and these policies are nothing but statements or instructions where we specify in a particular policy what are the resources that a particular user can access, and what level of access within the service can be, right? So we'll go one at a time, and we'll have a better understanding as we go forward in this particular session. So yes, IAM is basically more focused on authorization or the permissions on AWS resources and services, and it's completely works on policies. So so in AWS, right, the key service or the main service, how the AWS functions is based on IAM. Right, without IAM, none of the services will be services will be able to communicate or interact with. So IAM is specifically, as we just saw, it's more focused on authorization, right? So we define policies. In policies, we'll see how to define what resources and what API calls are allowed, or what actions are allowed on those resources, right? And how to apply this. And IAM policies can be written and applied using many multiple ways, right? Like AWS Web Console that we access in a browser, right? Using a console, we can also write IAM policies and attach it to a user or a group, or we can leverage AWS CLI, command line tool. Or if we are a programmer or a developer, we can also leverage SDK, right? If there is a Python programmer or a developer, he can leverage Port3. library that is designed by AWS. And specifically, if there is a Java developer, there is a separate library completely focuses on AWS services. So you can leverage these libraries to write your application logic or build any automations around cloud. So we'll go over what are the key components of IAM. Right. So as I told, the first key component is policy. So without policy, none of the below components will come into picture, like a user or a group or a role. Right. Policy is basically, it's like a simple document, a JSON document, right? And that particular document will have what service can be accessed. And at each service level, you have list of operations. Like, for example, if there is an S3 bucket or a storage service, right? We can do a lot of operations like creating an S3 bucket, deleting an S3 bucket, or writing an object or a content to an S3 bucket, modifying the existing content. So these are the operations. So within the policy, we can mention what resource, and top of it, what are the actions that are allowed within the policy. Once we have this written, we can apply it to the particular IAM user or a role, right? So when that particular IAM user tries to access via the AWS, right, whether CLI, SDK, or Web Console, he will be able to do only those things that are mentioned or authorized within that policy, which are attached to him, right? So that is about policy. If it so IAM user is nothing but a single user, right? So you're working for a company, there are thousands of employees, right? So each employee will have access to, not each employee, at least most of the employees around IT, security, engineering teams, right, will have access to AWS or the cloud resources. So each user will have a user account created using their particular official email address, right? So this is nothing but an IAM user. An IAM group is something, it's like a cluster of users, right? So I can give you an example of organization groups, right? In an organization or a company, you'll have a set of groups like a sales group, marketing group, IT, security group, engineering group, so many groups. So rather than going ahead and attaching policy for each users, right, which is a cumbersome process, so we can go ahead and attach it to a group. So I'll have say there is a 50 people working in an IT organization group. So all I can do is just create a single group with the name of IT, and then attach a policy to that group, right? So basically that policy will say what my IT team within the company can do within AWS, right? Whether so say the IT team just needs access to EC2 instances, S3, and none other services apart from these two. So I can write a policy, attach it to a group, and then whatever the 50 number of users, I can just bring them to this particular group, right? And then there is an somewhat a bit advanced concept known as IAM role. So the IAM role is something more used for at the resource level, right? So the first IAM user and group are targeted towards a particular user or a user, whereas a role is something is specific to a particular resource, AWS resource. For example, say EC2 instance, right? EC2 instance wants to access S3 bucket or any other AWS services. So that can be done by using IAM role. So basically, one AWS resource can access another IAM resource by using an IAM role. So basically, during writing an IAM role, we define policies, and in the policies, we'll say what are the things that particular EC2 instance can do, right? And only those are the things that the particular EC2 instance can do. And then we'll go over STS service, which is a very key concept. If you want to understand IAM role, how it works in the backend, STS service is one of the key concepts that you need to have a good understanding. And then we go over inline policy. Inline policy is like more focused around one-on-one relation. So we'll get to know as we go along. And then we'll go over the best practices around IAM passwords and access keys. So what are the types of policies are available in AWS, right? So there are 3 types of policies that are available. So we'll start with AWS managed policies. So these policies are nothing but AWS provides us these policies as a package, right? Once we have an AWS account, we have registered with an AWS, we'll get a set of policies. I think it's more than 200 policies. So we can basically consume those policies based on our needs, right? Say, and second type of policy is more around customer managed. So customer managed policies are those policies that a company requires a customized way of writing policy, where via the AWS managed policy we are not able to get it, right? If there is a policy that you need to combine multiple resources together in a single policy, or any kind of other services which are not part of AWS managed policies, then we can write our own customer managed policies. And then we have the third one known as inline policies. Inline policies is something very similar to the AWS managed as well as customer managed. The difference is it's a one-on-one relation, right? So when we talk about AWS managed policies and customer managed policies, the first two, these two policies, when we write a AWS or customer managed policies, we can apply this policy to any number of IAM entities. So when I say entities, it can be IAM users, IAM groups, or IAM role. So this the first two policies can be applied to any numbers, right? Whereas inline policy is targeted to a specific user or a group specific. And this policy, once created and attached to a user, cannot be attached to another user, right? And also the visibility. So inline policy, there won't be any visibility if you want to consume it to another user. You have to rather write your own new inline policy and attach it and consume. So there is another section known as resource-based policy, which which will be not covered here, because that will be too much to digest in a single session. So if we have very good understanding around IAM policy, then resource-based policy is very simple. It will hardly take a few minutes to get an understanding. So basically, we write policies, as I mentioned, in a form of a JSON. And the key elements that are present in policies are four things that you have to keep in mind. Effect. So effect, action, resource, and conditions. These four are the key elements. So let us go over here. So this is how a policy looks like, right? So this is specific to AWS managed policy. So if you see the right side type, you can see AWS managed, and the policy name is like Amazon DMS Redshift S3 role, or Amazon S3 full access. So we'll go and see what this Amazon S3 full access does, right? So as I mentioned, it's a JSON. JSON, in terms of JSON, we define the policies. So here we see two things on top, right? Version as well as statement. So version is something that can be anything, but statement is something is the key, right? Within the statement, we have four important parameters. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, these are the four things: effect, action, resource, and condition. So effect is basically you have two possible use cases, either allow or deny. So only possible values within the effect parameter is allow or deny, right? If you want to allow something, you write it as an allow. If you want to deny something, you write it as a deny, right? And action is something, you can call it as a API call or action, right? Resources, basically what service you want to give access, right? For example, here we talk about S3 full access, Amazon S3 full access, which is nothing but when there is a wildcard or star within the resource, it means you can access anything, right? Any services within AWS. But action is something which will define what particular service and what action can be done. Here we can see in the action there is an S3. So this basically means this particular policy or the set of instructions is for S3, and the star represents what actions can be done. So here there is a wildcard star for after the S3. So means it's a full access, right? You can do anything at the S3 level. You can create S3 bucket, delete S3 bucket, read and write S3 contents, right? So that is what it means here. So how do we go about creating a policy, right? So in the top screenshot, you can see here, we have an existing bucket in the name of blog.trivikram.tk, right? It's a static website hosted in this particular bucket, which is publicly accessible. So this particular bucket, right? So in AWS, there is something known as ARN, Amazon Resource Name. So basically, ARN is nothing but an identifier. So AWS uses this ARN to identify what resource it is and what objects within those resources it is. So here in this case, the ARN points to the bucket blog.trivikram.tk. So what we do is, while writing policy in the second screenshot, so I've consumed a visual editor. If you're very good in JSON, you can start coding in JSON itself. But for the easier understanding, we'll just go over visual editor, right? So within the S3 section, we'll see a service. So here we select S3. So we want to write policy for S3, right? So we select S3 and actions. Actions are like, currently say there is a need to only read. I want someone to just read the content of my bucket, blog.trivikram.tk bucket. I want someone to just read the bucket contents. I don't want him to either write to the content or write to the bucket or make changes or modify my contents in the bucket or delete my bucket, right? All I want to do is just allow him to read the contents of the bucket. So for that sake, I have selected get object and get bucket ACL. So get object allows you to retrieve the objects within the bucket, and get bucket ACL is basically nothing but what are the permissions that are there in the particular bucket. And resource. So in the resource section, we will see, so basically resource section points out to what resource you're applying this policy, right? So I am applying this policy to my bucket. So the bucket name is blog.trivikram.tk. So the resource will be this. So we basically copy the ARN, right, of the bucket ARN to here, right? And please make a note of one thing here. When we specify the resource, right, the ARN, if you see the last, right, after blog.trivikram.tk, there is a slash followed by a star, right? So let me see whether I can annotate. So there is something known as slash and star. So you have to mention this if someone wants to access this bucket, because if just the bucket ARN is mentioned, right? If only the ARN is mentioned, then the end user who has this policy attached to his user or a group will not be able to access the contents of the bucket, or will not be able to read the objects in the bucket. So make sure you include slash followed by star, right? This will enable you to access contents in the bucket. And then on top of all these three, the service, actions, and resources, we also have option to specify any specific conditions, right? So here in this condition, I've just mentioned, I've given an IP address, a particular IP address as a source IP. So what this particular policy means is, I am allowing access to my S3 bucket to only read the content from a particular IP address, right? So the conditions parameter will help you to write controls, more controls, granular controls. Here I've just restricted to a single IP. So any IP other than this, right? Other than this, any IP trying to access my bucket will not be able to access. So this is how we create a policy manually, right? So this particular screenshot, right? Couple of screenshots. The left side of the screenshot shows you types of policies, right? So in the top, we see customer managed policy. So previously we have written this policy, and I have named this policy as sample customer policy, which is a customer managed policy that I have written. And top of it, there are other policies that AWS gives us for our so that we can start leveraging it, right? So let us go and read the JSON document of the customer managed policy that we wrote. So this is how that JSON structure will look like. So here we'll see the same. So the effect is allow, followed by what actions. So actions are in S3 level. I'm enabling get object. That is basically read the object from the bucket and read the access control list of that particular bucket. And on the resource, I've just mentioned my bucket, the ARN of my bucket, followed by slash and star. So slash and star will enable the users to access the buckets, whoever I attach this policy to, right? And on top of it, there is a condition as well, where I mentioned only if the user is coming from this particular source IP, then allow, right? Then allow accessing my content. If the IP address is different from this particular specified one, then do not allow, right? So this is how the policy looks like. Right. So now we have a very high level understanding of how the policy looks like and how we write policies, right? Then we get into the next key components, that are user, role, and groups, right? So we'll start with IAM user, what it means. So as I mentioned, IAM user is nothing but an end user, right? It's a single user. Usually in cloud space, it is identified by email addresses, right? Email addresses. So IAM users, they come into picture once you log into the management console or you're authenticated into the AWS account, cloud account. Group, as I earlier mentioned, it eases out, right? Rather than writing policies for each and every user in a company, you can club those users to groups and attach a single policy to the group. So that way, a lot of redundancy works can be avoided. So IAM role, as I told earlier, it is something most of the use cases which I see for an IAM role is cross-account access, right? If there is, say there are two AWS accounts, account A and account B, and say one of the user in account A wants to access some resource in account B, right? Say he wants to access S3 bucket, a specific S3 bucket, or all the S3 buckets in account B. So we can leverage IAM role, so that once we write the policies and attach IAM role, we can basically use this role to attach it to the user and get access to it. This we'll see practically how this works, and that will give a very clear picture. So on a very high level, when we talk about IAM policies can be attached to any entities, IAM entities, users, groups, and roles. So that's a common concept, right? Policies is something common across users, groups, and roles. And policies are nothing but statements, JSON statement, where we define what are the things can be done and what are the actions authorized. And on top of it, we can also include conditions. So IAM user, as we have already spoken, it's targeted to particular users. So you write a policy and attach it to the user. So here in this case, there are three users, Susan, Dave, and Bob. So each user are referred to as IAM users, and you can attach policies to each individual users. Right. So how do we create an IAM user? Right. So we understand policy, how to create a policy, and how to interpret policies, right? How to read the policy and get an understanding. Now we'll see how to create an IAM user within AWS. So all we do is we go to the IAM section, click on add user, and we start adding the particular user. In this case, I've taken a sample user. So the user can be anyone. It can be an actual employee of the company, or it can be even some service account, right? Say if I want to run a particular cron job or any automation scripts or any tasks or any scheduling jobs to be run. And what I can do is I can create a user for that purpose. So similarly here I've written sample user and use this particular user to run those jobs and access our AWS resources and data based on our use cases required. So here when we create a user, we also have a couple of options where the access type can be just a web console, AWS web console, or programmatic access. So this is where the difference comes in. Say if it's an actual employee from, say, sales or a marketing, right? Most of the time they will not have use cases for writing programs or any scripts. In that scenario, we can just grant them AWS managed console access. So basically they will be able to log into the AWS account and then see what are the things out there, what are the things to get, right? Say if it's a developer or an IT or a security professional. And basically in all this IT and security and engineering groups, there will be need for both access, AWS management console as well as programmatic access. So programmatic access, if you enabled, right, it creates a set of keys, access key and secret key. So these two keys are used in your automation scripts, right? If you want to write an automation, you have some logic written for some job, and that say there is a script that wants to read data from S3 or read data from some other AWS services. What you can do is you can leverage this particular access key and secret key that we create here. So that is one thing. On top of it, you can also write your custom password or auto generate the password. And also you can enable forcing that particular user. If it's an employee or an end user, right? You can force them to reset the password during first login. This particular feature is more focused around security. And then, so this is the first step. And the second step is for that user, we attach policies, right? So if you remember, I initially told we write policies, right? We have a policy, but how to consume that policy, right? We have to attach this policy to an IAM user, a group, or a role. Until we don't attach, we'll be not able to consume this AWS resources, right? So here in this case, the previously written customer managed policy, that is sample hyphen customer underscore policy, right? This is something we will select for this particular user and we create, right? So the user is created. On the completion, right? On the completion of creating the user, there is one critical part. You will be directed to a page which will have access key and secret access key, right? Make sure you download this key or make a note of this key, right? Or if you want to send an email, you can send an email to that particular user by clicking the send email, right? So this will help in a programming perspective. So this is what we see. And so here, the right side, the sample user, you can see if you go to users in the right side of the screenshot, you can see sample user. And this sample user also has a ARN. There is something known as user ARN. Nothing but AWS will be able to identify what user it is, right? So if I create, so here we have created sample user as the username. So say if there is an employee with the name Bob, right? I'll create a user account for Bob, and basically the ARN will point to user Bob, right? And in the within the ARN, you see something after IAM, right? It is some numerical number 8160148880073. So this is nothing but the account, AWS account. So this will differentiate actually, right? So for each account, the account number will vary. So basically the ARN will have what service it is. So IAM is the service, and after that the account number and what entity it is, IAM entity. So in this case here, user. If it is a group, you will see group. If it is a row, you will see role, followed by the name of that. So here we have mentioned sample user as the user. And similarly, the policy. So the similar policy which we saw earlier is attached to it. So this is the policy where we have granting this user access to only specific bucket block.3vikram.tk to read the content, just to read the content. And if that user is coming from a particular source IP, right? So this is how you create user and attach policy. So we'll see group, right? Group is very similar to user. The only difference is that you basically club the users, right? Club the users to a single group, right? So so a group can contain multiple users, as we see here, and the policies which we saw in a previous slide. In a similar way, we can attach it to a group, right?